Good evening, economics students. This is Econ Lecture 5, and we're going to be in Chapter 12 of your textbook. So please fish out your textbooks, turn to Chapter 12. That's page 266 in my second edition. So we're in Chapter 12, and you'll need to see the charts to know what the heck I'm talking about. Well, we're going to be talking about environmental protection and negative externalities. So economics, as we've moved from the individual firm as a tight focus, and we're moving towards macroeconomics now, looking at broader things than the nation. But this is kind of in between. This is where, you do have broader social concerns, not just the firm. But we're going to talk a lot about the firm in this one. So this is still in the realm of microeconomics, the firm. All right. So we're going to talk about the economics of pollution. And they're pointing out down there on section 12.1, from 1970 to 2012, the U.S. population increased by 1/3. So in that 42 years, from 1970 to 2012, 42 years, the population of the United States increased by 1/3. And the size of the U.S. economy more than doubled. Since the 1970s, however, the United States, using a variety of anti-pollution policies, has made genuine progress against a number of pollutants. And Table 12.1 lists the change in carbon dioxide emissions by the users of energy, according to U.S. Information and Energy Information Administration. So, looking at Table 12.1 there, what you can see there is they break it down. Over on the left-hand column, you see the different users of energy. So residential, that would be you and me, and the light switch, and the natural gas that we use for our heaters and maybe your stove. So that's residential users of energy. Commercial users of energy would be like stores and the like. Industrial would be factories that manufacture something. And transportation would be, the cars we drive, the planes we fly in, and so on. Power generation is just telling us where the electricity is coming from. And you can see there that the residential sector in the United States in 2007 to 2012, so that 5-year period, used zero coal. There once was a time 100 years ago where Americans, people all over the world, burned coal at their homes. It was their cook stove, their heating for their home was often by coal. But coal burns so horribly pollutant, it just chokes the air. There was still a lot of coal burning being done in the early 1950s in London, and it killed tens of thousands of people when weather conditions trapped the coal smoke down in the city. And it was just murderous. And those cities that hadn't outlawed the use of coal did. So thank goodness people don't burn coal in their homes anymore. The petroleum might surprise you on that residential use. She'll let you know that up north, Yankees, a lot of them do in fact have oil tanks in their basements that they use for their home heating in the winter, fuel oil. But the biggest chunk is, as you see, natural gas, and then purchased electric power. So you can see, we do use natural gas for home heating, and some people cook with it, but the biggest chunk is purchased electric power in the home. Now, that's no great shock, right? You move on to residential, and it kind of mirrors, commercial, it kind of mirrors the residential on those usages. A little less natural gas, higher proportion electricity, that's no shock. Again, the natural gas usage has dropped, has gone up in industry because, natural gas is inexpensive and it's cleaner than some other alternatives for industry to use. So we've actually been encouraging industry to switch to natural gas for a lot of things. But power generation, now that there is where you see the biggest change. That 464 in parentheses mean that's dropped. In that 5-year period, coal use in electric power generation plummeted to the ground. And there still are some coal-fired electric plants, but until 2017, when President Trump came into office, everything the government was doing was saying, stop making electricity with coal. He did change that in his first week in office, so that now there has been some increase in coal use, but very little, because it's expensive and nobody thinks that that's going to last. I would be very surprised if the next president is, whenever it is, 4 years from now or soon, is as gung-ho on the coal industry as the present administration has been. But in any event, massive reduction in the use of coal to produce electricity in the United States. There has been increase in solar, in wind, and the like there. Okay, so externalities. Those are things that are not directly related to the market transaction. So I'm a buyer, you're a seller, and we're not talking about things that directly relate to the two of us. They're things that are external to our relationship as manufacturer and consumer, buyer and seller. Bigger issues. Now, one of the negative externalities is what's called social cost. These are social costs include the private cost of production incurred by the company and the external cost of pollution that are passed on to society. All right. So when a factory makes things and they belch out air pollution out of the smokestack, water pollution into the groundwater, into the rivers, into the groundwater, there is a cost to society for all that. Now, sometimes it's hard to put a dollar and cent amount on it. But, if you live near a factory that's belching out nasty pollutants, you're going to get sick more often, right? You're going to get all kinds of chest infections. People with asthma are going to have a heck of a time. Trust me, I know. Bad air makes for bad health and people around it. You're not involved. You don't work at the factory. You don't buy things from the factory, maybe even. You just happen to live near it. And all of us who live in cities live near polluting institutions, right? You drink groundwater, you drink water out of a well, you take water out of a reservoir. If somebody's polluting that, it's affecting the population taking it out there. And we need, as economists, to find some way to take the cost of all that into account. Now, things like the health of people in the vicinity, those things might be things you can put a dollar and cent amount on. It might not be easy, but you can at least see what it costs to treat them and the like. But then there are costs that are a whole heck of a lot more difficult to manage, and that includes, how do we determine air pollution that causes acid rain that destroys a forest near the factory? It's not a trout stream or something, but it's, if poisons going into the groundwater at the factory kill fish, and they're not fish that we were going to catch and eat and sell, but they're just fish in the water, Mother Nature, surely we should take that into account as a cost. But it might be difficult to determine these more aesthetic things. If pollution kills off an endangered species, do we just ignore the fact, or do we find some way to put some value on it? It can be a challenge. It can be a challenge. But, I just want to start off the chapter. They start off the chapter by saying anti-pollution measures have really changed things. Ask your parents. They're probably roughly my age, maybe a little younger now, I don't know. But when I was a boy in the early 70s, when I was a little boy, we frequently had smog days at school. Now, I know they still talk about ozone warnings and all that, but I'm talking about where you could look towards downtown Fort Worth and see a brown haze over the city. I remember this. Those days are essentially gone because our air pollution laws have brought an end to them. The cars that we make now are much cleaner as far as what comes out of their exhaust pipes than they were 40 years ago. Vastly cleaner. Gas mileage is so much better that it produces less pollutants. And the factories are much better policed. I mean, in the early 70s, they were only just beginning to pass things like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. And it really has worked. It's worked great to make this a much cleaner environment. Thanks be to God. The term on the bottom of page 269, market failure, is referring to when you look at the market we normally think about. You, the seller, me, the buyer. That's what we've been focusing on up to now, right? But that relationship doesn't take into account the dead forest, the dead fish in the water. I'm buying a refrigerator from your factory. That doesn't factor into that market cost. So that's a market failure to account for social cost. You understand? So what the pollution regulations the government has put into place has been trying to address that. And what you're looking at on figure 12.2, which, well, that's probably not going to work. Oh, okay, maybe. What you're looking at there is, you're famous. There is your demand curve. Here are your supply curves. Now, the one further to the right is the supply curve for a market that does not take the social cost of pollution into account. But when you do start to add those costs to the manufacturer, make them pay for their pollution in one way or another, what happens is the supply curve shifts to the left. Now, that means consumers have to pay more. There's no such thing as a free lunch, as they say. If you put pollution control measures in place, in some way it's going to affect the market. That's going to almost certainly lead to higher consumer prices, and it's almost certainly going to lead to challenges for the manufacturers that they either decide to pass on those costs to the consumers or eat them and to reduce their profits. So these are the kind of decisions they've got to make. But adding social costs shifts the supply curve to the left. All right? Okay. Moving ahead, and you'll see the chart they've got there, work it out, identifying the equilibrium price and quantity. That is table 12.3. That's what they're showing you. When you take into the account the social cost, when the manufacturers have to pay for their pollution, one way or another, we'll talk about the ways they do, the amount they're willing to supply at a given price is going to drop, right? It's more expensive for them to manufacture, so they're not going to put as many on the market at the lower price they used to. If they're going to demand a higher price to get the same number of goods you used to buy. That means consumer prices go up. And this shows how that happens. So the supply curve shifts to the left when you put in these kind of social costs. Okay, moving on to 12.2. Actually, we're going to do that in the next lecture. I just looked up and seen that it's 13 and a half minutes in, so tune back in for lecture 6 in Econ, and we'll continue talking about pollution. See you soon.